no surprises really, were there, Natasha Clark?
No, not really. I thought his final answer to Stephen Flynn
Yeah.
was interesting when he was asking him about possible opening up of refugee corridors. He sort of batted that one back and said we've already are very, very generous in giving aid to lots of other refugee organisations, but he did not really comment either way on whether, schemes like the Afghanistan scheme could be opened up in future to deal with Israeli, Gaza and Palestinian people fleeing that conflict.
It'd be slightly odd politically, wouldn't it, to put Suella Braverman in charge of safe corridors for refugees coming into the country when all of her political capital is currently invested in getting them all out.
Exactly, and that's, to be fair, that is actually what's giving the government a huge headache over migration at the moment, because the numbers keep on going up. But obviously, Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman have allowed many thousands of people to come into the country, so it's a difficult balancing act for them. But yes, we did just see a real show of unity in PMQs that I think we don't really see very often, and I think it only really comes around in times of crisis, in times of war, where politicians of across the chamber unite and sort of give each other easier ride, really. They give each other easier questions, and you didn't really see any real probing from Sir Keir Starmer today of Rishi Sunak, did you? It was basically just, will the Prime Minister agree with me? More needs to be done on X, Y and Z. So,
did Stephen Flynn go further than the other two there with the ceasefire? Calling for a ceasefire puts him in a different position from Starmer and Sunak.
I don't believe either of the two of them have, Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, have said we are calling for specifically for a ceasefire at the moment. I think that the biggest position of both of those parties, both the government and the Labour Party, is that Israel should have that right to defend itself, and that contradicts somewhat the idea of a ceasefire. Like we were saying earlier, this is Sir Keir Starmer's chance to show that he can be a statesman, he can be the Prime Minister in waiting, and I think he obviously thought that with the seriousness of events going on in Israel, Gaza, that now was not the time to do political attacks on Rishi Sunak about this.
No, although Stephen Flynn, of course, conscious of the SNP leader in Scotland, Humza Yousaf's remarkable perspective on this unfolding situation.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously we've seen the SNP conference over the last few days be somewhat overshadowed by the situation in Israel, Gaza, and obviously Humza Yousaf and his wife's personal links to the area. And we've, heard some very moving stories from him and his wife about what that means for them. So I think it has sort of muted the conversation about this.
Well, it's a fascinating dimension, really, when you hear, and I know Sheila, did Sheila speak to his wife, I think?
Yeah, she did. Very powerful, speaking about her relatives.
Because we talk in the abstract sometimes about human lives. Inevitably, it's the nature of the medium. But Humza Yousaf, when he hears talk, almost of collateral damage, almost of some people in Gaza are going to have to die in pursuit of the greater goal of either eradicating Hamas or retaliating to the terror attack. He's thinking of his wife's parents.
Yeah, it was very powerful to hear from her and hear that first-hand stories of how their relatives were impacted, and I think that was the tone of all MPs today, and I'm sure what we're missing right now is them issuing that same sort of tone and that urge for calm, condemning the terrorists. Do not rush to judge the situation of what we saw last night with that attack on the hospital before everybody knows the full facts.
It's a bit late now, isn't it?
It is a bit
for some corners. How much is riding on these by-elections tomorrow?
I think, to be honest with you, the Conservatives, it's a little bit baked in, their losses, obviously. If they lose both of them, I don't think anybody would be too surprised. If they manage to cling on to Mid-Bedfordshire, which, as some people think they might do, that would be considered a win.
Because of a split between Labour and Lib Dem support, as much as...
Yes, definitely, that's definitely a key part. But also just because I think the candidates have not been, in terms of Nadine Dorris's involvement in the campaign and the candidates who were there, they've not sort of shunned her in the way that you might expect them to do so. With obviously Chris Pincher and he's the candidate in Tamworth, the former MP in Tamworth, and obviously his role in the downfall of Boris Johnson and that behaviour at the Carlton Club more than a year ago, which eventually led to this by-election. There's a little bit of two different stories emerging here in terms of what voters, I think about the Conservative Party.
And there may be another one soon.
Yes, there may be another one after Peter Bone, the Conservative MP for Wellingborough, was recommended a 6-week suspension by the House of Commons yesterday for historic behaviour. It's actually a really appalling read if you look at the details of that report.
It's grim.
Throwing things, belittling, bullying, sexual elements as well to that. It was a very disturbing read. He denies all of those allegations, we should also mention.
Is it baked in that there will be a recall? Or is...
Sorry, for Peter Bone?
Yes.
Yes, so he is facing a 6-week suspension from the House of Commons. Anything over 10 days will trigger that recall petition, which means that it goes to constituents in Wellingborough. They have a number of weeks to sign a petition whether they want to trigger that recall.
Is it 10,000? How many do they need to sign?
I think it's 10% of the electorate in that constituency.
Okay.
So quite a large number, but that number has been reached in various recent examples. I think what Peter Bone will argue was that the historic allegations are so far in the past that the recall petition rules only came in after 2015, so he's going to argue, well, they shouldn't apply to me.
Is he?
I think that's the understanding.
Good grief, that's bold, isn't it?
Yeah.
Natasha Clark, many thanks. So, I mean, essentially saying, well, it wasn't against the rules when I did it.
I think that's one of his arguments.
Even though
at the
I didn't
moment.
do it.
He does obviously deny all of the allegations as well.
So he's going, what you might call a pincer movement. I definitely didn't do these things, but neither should I be held to account for doing them, because the method by which I would be held to account for doing them if I had done, which I didn't do, didn't exist when I did them, but I didn't do them.
In fairness, that's what the law says, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed.
We don't retrospectively apply the law when it changes.
That'll be interesting.